Sonic Adventure, Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic Heroes, Shadow the Hedgehog, Sonic 06. These games defined the early 2000s of the Sonic series. And honestly, I can't tell you how much inspiration really came from these stories. And you could definitely tell that they were trying really hard to do something new and innovative. But why does it work? Why do these darker stories work with what was once such a lighthearted and fun and sort of avoidant of anything dark or serious or any sort of tone that would bring out those themes, right? Why did they suddenly decide to make that change? And that's just a question that is really hard to answer, obviously, because it's definitely a product of the times. I would say for one, it was very much a thing back then to be dark and edgy. You know, you saw it in movies and just what was popular at the time. It really seemed to make an impact on Sonic, but it definitely hit the hardest around 2005 with the release of Shadow the Hedgehog. The way that game just went full force, full on into Shadow's story, basically took the little snippet of story they had for Shadow in Adventure 2, where we only just got flashes of what was going on in his backstory. Now we have a whole entire game going into all the details and all the possibilities of paths you can take now in the present. And I think as well that a lot of people out there still have this whiplash of that new era of these sudden changes to the series and these new darker, more serious stories that were definitely taking the series into a new direction. I would really like to answer the question of why a darker, more serious tone is desired. Let's even leave darker out of it and just say, let's have a story that takes itself seriously. It doesn't necessarily need to be dark, especially if that's like forced, because then that's what creates this feeling of like, oh, they're trying to be dark, so then it comes off as just edgy, right? Whereas if it's just a story that takes itself seriously and is paying attention to its characters and their development and actually wants to tell a story that says something and that isn't just another story where they stop Eggman or some ancient being, like they actually have to overcome something internal. It's not just about the external of stopping the villain. There's something within that they have to battle. And that is why I love Sonic 06. And I think that its story, while it has its problems in many different areas, I think what it did really well is the characterization. Some could argue that Sonic comes off a little bit too stoic, like he's not really his usual self, making quips and jokes and all that kind of stuff, but I never really saw Sonic as that character. I feel like Sonic is whatever the story needs him to be. Meaning, if there's something really serious going on, I don't think it would be fitting for Sonic to be so light and fun and making jokes, right? I think that's why we got so frustrated with his character in the past 10 years with, you know, the new writers they brought in and the new tone they were trying to push, which was just like completely avoidant of the early 2000s tone. So with that all being said, is it really darker stories that we want? I think, yeah, every now and then it would be nice to have a darker story with just darker themes within it, as long as it's not something that's super forced and just comes out of nowhere. I think that's where Shadow the Hedgehog went wrong, is that they didn't really build up to anything. It was just Sonic Heroes and then Shadow the Hedgehog. If Sonic Heroes was maybe a little bit darker and had a little bit more of preparing for Shadow's next game, like sort of introducing some elements that would be featured in his solo game, and they kind of teased it and like the tone felt like it was going in that direction. Now, what makes a story like that work? How can you take this seriously, you know? And I think it's not just about being genuine and sincere in your storytelling. I think that definitely is a step. But I think it's understanding why the Sonic world and its characters work with a serious tone. It's kind of because of the decisions they made in Sonic Adventure. If we go all the way back to that game, the answer lies there. And the decision to bring Sonic to the real world, or rather reveal that, hey, this has always been Earth. We're not on some other planet. Eggman's a human, so there's other humans, right? Just the same as like there are more of Sonic's kind out there. So the decision to take this fantasy story and ground it in reality while keeping those fantasy elements, I think is a huge key part of why no other franchise could pull off what this one has. It's a very cartoony character. Obviously, it lost a lot of that in the late 90s when Sonic had his big redesign, and now he is even more realistic looking. It's sort of opened the door for a more serious tone, but also a slightly older audience. The stories became more complex, characters could talk now. All those changes that were made to the character and the franchise as a whole at the time is what allowed for this to be a reality. Now, with that being said, I do think that maybe Classic is not given enough credit to where we have gotten in the early 2000s and where we are now. Now, for the next reason as to why I think that darker stories work in this franchise, it goes back before the 2000s. And I want you to consider this. Maybe those darker elements of storytelling have sort of always been there.
Blue streak speeds by Sonic the Hedgehog.
Because see, there's this old show that's sort of been lost to time that left a great impact on me and I'm sure a lot of other people, but it just isn't talked about that much. And to be fair, I haven't seen any of it in so long, but from what I remember, it was introducing darker themes before modern Sonic was even here. And that is Sad AM, the Saturday morning Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon. And no, not the super colorful one with all the stupid jokes in it, but no, the other one. The one where Sonic and his friends, the Resistance, the Freedom Fighters, living in an apocalyptic world taken over by Eggman. The concepts that were in this show are quite frankly disturbing to think about. Eggman would basically try to capture Sonic and his friends and turn them into robots, roboticizing as they called it. But it wasn't just transforming them into a robot, like making Metal Sonic, which is a separate entity from Sonic. It was like, no, they're gonna take your brain, remove every other organic part of your body, and replace it with robotic parts. Tell me that's not a terrifying concept, and that is in a Saturday morning cartoon for kids!
Uncle Chuck, what's up? Uncle Chuck? Oh, man.
It's all right, Sonic. We saved Mobius. That's the important thing.
We've got to get you back to Knothole. Warp 7.
It's too late, Sonic.
Uncle Chuck? No way am I leaving you here.
Sonic, he's turned back.
I mean, that is such a dark and disturbing thing to think about happening to you. And so I think those darker elements were there at the very beginning. Now let's go back even further. Sonic 1. Eggman is capturing these woodland creatures in Green Hill and using them to power his badniks, his robots. But really think about the concept. The woodland creatures are just like animals you'd find out in a forest, like in real life, like squirrels and rabbits, and they're just animals. And he's using them to power his very complicated robots that require a lot of energy. So my theory here is that any energy that were being taken from these animals was short-lived. So basically he would drain them of all their energy until they would die. Now thankfully Sonic would go and destroy the robots so they could escape before that would happen. But I'm sure there were plenty of cases where it just kept going until the woodland creature inside just couldn't take it anymore and just died. Like just all their energy and being was just drained. And that's just a dark concept by itself, let alone when you consider that the fact that Eggman is using nature against itself. I mean, he's always been, from the very beginning, a very dark and twisted villain. Even though Sad AM is not canon, it's its own canon. It is not connected to the games, but it is still a part of the history. And I think it's worth looking at that, like, I don't know, as lighthearted as things could be, right? There has always been a darker tone. There has always been darker themes. I think what I would like to see in the future is that we maybe lean into that, as long as it feels natural and it's not forced. I think that's a key reason as to why darker themes have always worked in Sonic, because number one, they've always been a part of it. And it's something that I overlook all the time and I forget about all the time, but even something like Sonic CD, it has a lot of dark elements to it. Getting to see the bad future of all these different places is quite disturbing sometimes, especially when you realize Eggman wins a lot in all these futures, and everything just becomes this robotic hellscape, you know? It really is interesting to see how that unravels. So rather, I don't think they were avoidant of it back then. I think they became avoidant of it right around the time that Sonic Colors was released, because Unleashed definitely had some darker themes to it, even though it was much more of a lighthearted, more Pixar stylized type thing. It was definitely still much more of a serious story that had very emotional moments, actually, with Sonic befriending Chip and then having to lose him at the end of the game. That's obviously, you know, that's a big moment. And so going to Colors, and then from Colors all the way to Forces, like something just doesn't seem right. Something just doesn't feel right. In the case of Forces, I have read the proper translation from the Japanese dub, and clearly they either mistranslated or they changed some things around for the Western audience, and I don't know why they keep doing that, and this is a side tangent, but I just think that that also hurts the tone, because the writing is a huge part of the tone. And if things aren't being properly translated, and then I find out about that and I go and read that as a fan, and I'm just like, why do the characters feel more true to who they are here, but they don't feel as consistent and as true to who they are in the English dub? It just doesn't make any sense. So that's just something I wanted to point out too, that I think has also negatively impacted everything. So all in all, I think the elements that combine together that allow a darker story to work in this franchise is as follows. It's mixing the fantasy elements of your story with a real grounded world that is relatable, that you can picture yourself in. And using Earth and basing Sonic's world off of Earth is a very good idea. Having all these places coexist, it really creates a very interesting world that just feels like it has infinite possibilities of storytelling and where these characters can go and all the different types of stories you can tell. There are places that are very higher than life and very fantasy, and there's also places that are very grounded and very realistic. And I think that mix, that collision of those two elements really allows for these stories to happen and to work and to function. I think as well that, like I was just saying, I think the darker elements were always there. They were just more subtle in the classic days. And I think in the early 2000s, they became much more blown up. And another thing is good characterization and good writing. I think these things are really important. And having a story that has something to say and is very sincere in its storytelling and isn't afraid to take itself seriously. And then there's Sonic's design. I think his design change has led to this being a possibility and has opened the door for even darker, more serious stories and for the characters to feel more cool and badass. You know, it's just something you didn't really get as much with the classic characters and their more cutesy designs. So I think everything has always been going in this direction. It was just a matter of time. And I think these elements are elements that always need to be present if they want to do a darker and more serious story successfully. I think that this is an absolute necessity, the things that I've mentioned in this video, in order for that to be a reality and to be done right. We'll see what happens with future projects and if they ever remake Adventure 1 and 2, which we probably will see that in the future, I'm sure. But even if not, whatever they decide to do that's new, I'm really interested as to where they're gonna take things now from Frontiers, you know, because Frontiers shows a lot of promising things, acknowledging Tails's mischaracterization in Forces and Frontiers and sort of fixing it and patching it up and giving all these characters moments where they can reflect on their past and acknowledge the past. I think those things are very important, and I think that's the last thing that I'll say as something that's really necessary is allowing the characters to talk about past events that have happened in previous games and reflect on things, because I think it shows that, oh, this is the same character. They've just changed over time, and they went through different phases, and you know, you could even make the argument, why was Sonic so stoic in Sonic 06? I think, well, they just got done dealing with an alien invasion in Shadow the Hedgehog, so I think everyone was a little on edge after that game, which I think is I think that fits. I think that's proper character development, you know, for Sonic to take things a little more seriously and be a little less of a silly fun guy, you know. I think that's fine. But it also makes sense that over time that came back. People change all the time. We all go through phases of life and feel differently. I think the same applies to these fictional characters. Why the hell not? So I think that's all I wanted to say in this video. If you've made it all the way to the end, I really appreciate you. Be sure to like the video if you enjoyed, and I would love to have you as a creator here on this channel. We have lots of discussions here. I have my own animated series that I'm currently working on right now. So if you want to keep up to date on that and just join this community where we can talk about all the different story elements and characters in the Sonic franchise, it would just be awesome to have you. So check out the channel, consider subscribing and becoming a creator. I really would appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video, creators. Peace out.